I'm scared to tell you this. Terrified, actually. I have figured out the number one thing that guides most poker players' decisions. It's the reason why they get stuck at low stakes, and why they can't seem to build a bankroll, and why they get trapped making the same bad decisions over and over and over. I'm talking about fear. I'm going to show you how fear drives decision making in all the most common spots in poker. We're going to talk about where it pops up and how you can eliminate it from your game. And maybe by seeing all these patterns, you can start to exploit other players when you recognize signs of fear. Don't be scared. Let's jump in. All right, so let's talk about the first sign of fear, and this is fear of a bad runout. And this manifests itself because players tend to overstab when they are in position, and they tend to fast play way too much good stuff when they are out of position. So first, let's talk about overstabbing. So we are going to be the scared hero in this hand. We are playing 2-5. We open it up on the button at $20. The villain, the small blind, is going to 3-bet 290, and we are going to call with pocket jacks. Flop comes queen 8-3. Now the villain is going to check it over, and because there are some straight draws out there, there is a flush draw out there. This board is wet, it is dynamic, lots of bad turn cards can come. We are going to stab here in position because we're scared of bad cards coming. This is a mistake, and it's letting fear guide our decision. And you can tell you're making a fear-based decision because if the board is something like king 8-3 rainbow and it's checked over to us and we're much more likely to check back here, we are making a decision out of fear. A bad reason to stab here on this board would be, I need to protect my hand. That is the fear talking. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean stabbing to us is the wrong play, but I'm a lot more about process over results. And a bad reason to stab here would be, well, I'm scared of a bad runout coming. A good reason to stab here might be, well, maybe when our opponent checks here, they are capped, they would just bet off all of their good hands, and our opponent may make more mistakes when we stab here versus when we check back. Say, for example, when we check back, our opponent is under bluffing, that they just always have showdown value, that they are not going to start running big bluffs, then just betting here and not worrying about protecting our check back range may be the highest EV play. But again, it's process over results. It's the thoughts that go into these decisions, not the actual decision itself. All right, the second cause of fear of a bad run out here is fast playing too much good stuff. So let me show you. In this hand, the villain is going to open on the button. We're going to defend in the big blind with ace jack offsuit. Flop comes jack 9 deuce. We check. Our opponent bets very small, just under half pot here. And you know what? This is a pretty scary board. We're scared of our opponent getting there with a flush, with a straight draw. We're not going to know how to play on a bunch of turns. So maybe because we've got top pair, top kicker here, and our opponent bets small, we should just check raise. And you can tell this is fear-based thinking because the same situation, if the board is ace 7 deuce instead of jack 9 deuce with no flush draw, and we have bottom set on this board, we may just call here because we're not worried about scary turn cards. We're not worried about scary river cards. So this is how you can see, if we would just call here on ace 7 deuce, this is how you can hold yourself accountable and see that you are making a fear-based decision. So this doesn't necessarily mean that check raising on this board is bad. Again, we just want to put process over results. A bad reason to check raise on this board would be, well, I need to protect my hand. A good reason to check raise on this board might be, hey, my opponent's going to be way too inelastic with value. Even if I check raise here, I don't think my opponent is folding a hand like jack 10 or queen jack that is worse for value, and they're certainly not folding flush draws or straight draws. So maybe we should just check raise here because maybe we're against a more passive villain who's not going to bet thinly with a hand like queen jack across 3 streets, and they're not going to put in 3 streets for massive bluffs with air or gut shots or straight draws here. So we're not missing out on value from them bluffing, and they just don't have a big fold button, so they're not going to fold top pair. So by check raising here against a villain who's going to be sticky, more inelastic, more on the passive side, we are maximizing value. We come to the exact same decision, but the thoughts in that second example are not led by fear. They are led by crystal clear reasons why it is higher EV possibly to check raise against a specific villain rather than just calling. All right, the second way fear manifests itself in poker is fear of tough decisions. And we see this through double barreling, kind of merged hands that are in the middle, not really value, not really a bluff. We see it through not betting rivers thinly enough in position, and we see it through cold calling 3-bets. So let's jump in and tackle these one by one. First example, this kind of double barreling a merged hand, not really for value, not really as a bluff, just because we're kind of scared. So we're playing 2-5, we're gonna open on the button, big blind's going to call, flop comes queen 8-6, our opponent checks it over. We are going to c-bet here, which is perfectly fine. Our opponent is going to call. Now the turn is a 3, and on this turn with a hand that's kind of in that thin value, kind of showdown value-y range here, we are going to double barrel because, hey, if we double barrel here, we're not going to have to face a river bet. We can just check back a lot on the river. We're not going to have to make a tough decision. And not having to face a river bet, not having to put ourselves in a situation where we make a decision is not a good reason to continue betting on this turn. This doesn't mean this is absolutely bad in a vacuum to continue betting on this turn with a hand like pocket tens, but the reasons why we may want to continue betting on this turn is, number one, if our opponent is very, very passive, and even if we check back on this turn, if our opponent isn't going to come out and bluff a misdraw on the river, or if our opponent is very, very sticky and they're just never going to fold a hand like 8x or 6x here on this turn, maybe those are good reasons to continue value betting. But in general, most players, if you check back this turn, you guys know my favorite line in poker, c-bet the flop, check back the turn with showdown value, and bluff catch the river. A lot of players, if you check back this turn, are going to come out and bluff the river for half pot whenever they have a brick draw like 9-10, 7-9, bricked spades, 5-7. When they have those brick draws on the river, they're just going to come out and bet half pot. And then when they do have a very strong hand on the river, like king queen or ace queen or something like that, they'll just come out and bet 3/4 pot or pot because a pot is small and the turn went check check. So we don't even really have all that tough of a decision on the river if we check back this turn. So once again, bad reason to continue betting on this turn because we don't want to have to face a river bet. A good reason to continue betting on this turn might be because our opponent is passive and they are massively under bluffing. They're not going to come out and bluff the river if we check back this turn, which is very, very rare. Even passive villains in live poker, if you give them rope, they will bluff sometimes. And we can hold ourselves accountable and see that this is fear-based decision making because a lot of the times we're in the same situation where we c-bet the flop here, except now we have ace 4 of spades instead of pocket tens, and now the turn is the 3 of spades here on this turn. Well, I've got the nuts here. I have no hands to really be worried about, so I'm just going to check back here. And this is how I would hold myself accountable and see that I'm making fear-based decisions. If I would want to bet pocket tens on the turn here, but I would want to check back the nut flush, I'm definitely not asking the right questions in game, and I can see that I'm letting fear guide me instead of wanting to make the highest EV choice possible. All right, fear of tough decisions also manifests itself in not betting rivers thinly enough. So let's look at a couple examples. We open king queen on the button. Our opponent calls in the big blind. Flop comes queen 9-7. We are going to c-bet. Our opponent calls. Turn is a 4. We are going to continue betting here. This is probably not the ideal size we should be using on the turn. Probably should just be going bigger here when our opponent is capped. But we see this in live poker a lot. The 2/3, 3/4 pot size bet on the turn with value. Players use it all the time because it is comfortable and it is scary to jump outside that comfort box. We bet 75 here on the turn. Now the river is a 4, and all too often on this river, I just see players snap check back here with top pair second kicker on the river because they are just scared to face a tough decision. What if I get raised here? And that is fear-based thinking. Listen, the last time someone check called the flop, check called the turn, and then check raised the river as a bluff, George Washington Carver was president of the United States of America. It just doesn't happen. If you get raised on this river, you can just fold. But we should often be betting this river for value. So fear-based thinking on this river would be, well, I don't know what to do if I face a check raise here. That is the fear talking. Maybe a good reason to consider checking back the river, maybe with a hand not quite as strong as this, but slightly weaker, would be, you know what? This villain is super, super aggressive, and they will check raise quite a bit for thin value, and they will also check raise quite a bit as a bluff, thus putting us in a blender and not allowing us to have a profitable river bet for value here. That would be the reason to consider checking back. That is almost non-existent in live poker. Don't let fear of some imaginary decision that's probably never going to come to fruition let you make suboptimal choices. So same thing here. We often see this again. We open pocket sevens on the button. We flop a set. Pretty good. We're going to c-bet. Turn is a 4. We are going to continue barreling. Again, not the size I would choose, but we're talking about fear today, and this is how fear-based players play. Fear may be in this spot. Well, I'm scared if I go too big, our opponent will fold and I won't get paid. All right, so our opponent calls. River brings in the flush, and again, we have a set here, but the obvious draw comes in, and all too often I see players just check back with hands like pocket sevens or pocket nines in this spot. Again, don't let fear of some imaginary tough decision hold you back from taking the highest EV action in game. All right, another example of where you will see fear of tough decisions hold players back when they start cold calling 3-bets. A villain opens here in the hijack, and now there is a 3-bet in the cutoff. And don't let yourself fall into this trap where you have a hand like pocket jacks or pocket queens or ace king here after it goes open and 3-bet in front of you, and you just call. All too often, the decision making behind this thought process is simply, well, you know, I kind of want to wait for a safe flop. I don't want to bloat the pot with a hand like pocket queens or pocket jacks here. What if I get 5 5-bet. And so this thought process leads players really to only cold 4-betting hands like specifically aces and kings. So when they cold 4-bet, they are just super exploitable. You can just fold everything to these players when you see them start cold calling 3-bets. Bad reasons to flat here to cold call a 3-bet would be, I don't want to see a bad flop, or hey, I don't want to bloat a pot with pocket queens here, so I'm just going to call. Not good. I am a big fan of playing cold 4-bet or fold. I don't like cold calling 3-bets 95+% of the time. In this situation here on the button, I am going to play this as a 4-bet. And you know what? If we get 5-bet, live players do not 5-bet really anything but aces 90+% of the time. So if we get 5-bet, we can just fold. We can 4-bet fold for value, right? It's the same thing as like bet folding post flop, right? We can 4-bet, and if our opponents call, well, we are often going to have the best hand. We are going to have initiative. We're going to have more hands in our range than just aces and kings. We're going to be tougher to play against post flop. And if our opponent goes with the 5-bet, we have a pretty easy decision. They're just going to have aces most of the time. So with pocket queens here, we can just fold quite a bit of the time if our opponent starts to 5-bet. This doesn't mean we can never cold call a 3-bet, because I never like to say never or always in poker. Here's a situation where the perfect storm aligns, where we may want to consider cold calling a 3-bet, but notice how different the reasoning is. So in this example, fish is going to open in the hijack. We're 3,000 effective with this player. Now a reg, a player who is playing for profit, is going to 3-bet in the cutoff. And now we're on the button with a hand like pocket queens or pocket kings or pocket jacks. In this situation, we maybe want to consider cold calling, because a couple things happen here. If we cold call, we are going to invite the fish into the pot. We are going to be last to act post flop. We are much deeper with the fish, and we're not going to get blown off our equity here, because most fish in general are not going to 4-bet nearly enough. Most fish are passive, right? So this fish is going to call quite a bit, and then the reg in the middle is going to be kind of handcuffed post flop, going to have to play straight up because he's got 2 other players in the pot, and this gives us a much bigger chance to stack the fish who we are 3,000 effective with. But for this to happen, kind of the perfect confluence of events has to line up 95% of the time. Probably my advice, I would just be playing 4-bet or fold. Real quick, if you guys are enjoying this video, all I ask, please hit that thumbs up button, subscribe. It helps us in the algorithm, and that does great things for everybody involved. Thank you guys. Have a gentle day. All right, the next way we see fear creep into our decision-making in live poker, the fear of humiliation. And this manifests itself because players often bet bluff small, out of position on rivers, and they bluff catch too much. So let's talk about these 2 examples. All right, so in this one, we are in the big blind. Button, the villain's going to open. We're going to defend with queen 10 off, is fine. Jack 9 deuce, we check. Our opponent c-bets. We are going to call. Now the turn is the innocuous 4 of diamonds. We check, it checks back. And now on this river, we are going to come out and bluff. And I often see players just use this half pot size because I guess they're getting a good price on their bluff. And I see players bluff way more in this situation from out of position than I see them bluff from in position. And my best guess here, the thing that I've come up with why players are bluffing so often from out of position, because if the river goes check, the out of position player has to show first. They have to turn over queen high. And that's kind of humiliating to show, oh, I didn't stab at this. I have queen high. You have to show that you have nothing here. And I often see the same situation play out in position. The same player who will bluff from out of position on a river, they will just c-bet the flop here. They'll double barrel the turn with a straight draw, and then the river is a blank, and they'll just check back and give up, because when they are in position, well, the out of position player flips over their cards and they have to show, and the in position player can just muck their queen 10. No one has to see it. There is no fear of humiliation. So fear-based thinking on this river is, I don't want to have to show. I don't want to be humiliated and have to show queen high here. Not letting fear guide your decision would be, hey, I have queen high. Bluffing probably outperforms the EV of giving up on this river. What size do I need to bet to target the portion of my opponent's range to get them to fold to have a profitable bluff in this spot? You see, we can often come to the same decision again. It's process over results. And one of the quickest ways I have found working with hundreds of students to improve your poker game is to value the thought process over what exactly happens in the hand. Because you're never going to play that exact spot with that exact hand in that exact configuration against that exact exact opponent ever again. So the results don't really matter. What matters is the thought process that guided you to come to those actions. And if the thought process on this river is, well, I'm just gonna bluff because I don't wanna be humiliated and have to show queen high, bad. If the thought process is, well, you know, when my opponent c-bets and then checks back the turn, I think they're just gonna have a lot of showdown value here, so I'm going to choose the size maybe on this river to fold out a hand like 9x or pocket 8s or ace high because I think it is more profitable than just checking and giving up with queen high. See, we can come to the same decision, but the process of coming to that decision in the second situation is going to lead you to be a much more profitable player long term. All right, and fear of humiliation can also lead us kind of to excessive bluff catching. So we see in this hand, villain opens on the button, we defend in the big blind with 9-7, jack 9 deuce, we check it over, our opponent c-bets, we call, turn is a 4 of diamonds, our opponent goes half pot, we have a pretty easy call, wide versus wide here, now the river is a 3, we check it over, our opponent bets once again, and in this spot, fear is often driving our decision making because we think, hey, you know what, I don't want to be pushed around here, I don't want this guy to get the best of me. That is fear-based decision making. I don't want to be pushed around. A good reason to consider calling on this river would be, hey, in this situation, in a wide versus wide configuration, this player has too many bluffs getting to the river. I believe he is over bluffing. Once again, can still lead to the same action, but the thought process behind those two decisions is completely and vastly different. So we are going to make the call and we are good. Let's say same situation, our opponent opens on the button and now they're going to c-bet, we call, turn is a 4, our opponent overbets and we think, well, you know what, maybe they're just doing this they're gonna give up on the river and they're just going for that double barrel here. We'll kind of play Fifth Street Chicken. We call, and now we check, and our opponent puts in all the money. And in this situation, when the bluffs get big, when the money gets really, really big, the fear-based thinking often shifts from, well, this guy's trying to push me around to, holy crap, that's a lot of money. I'm gonna look like an idiot if I'm wrong here. So once again, players in our shoes are often bluff catching too much because of fear in small pots, and they're often bluff catching too little because of fear in big pots. In both cases, fear is guiding the decision. We can ask much better questions here to help us come to the right decision. In this spot, I'd use the bluff catching checklist and ask questions like, could we be beating some of our opponent's value? Well, no, probably not in this spot. Worst hand they're betting for value, maybe a hand like ace jack. Did we give our opponent rope? Well, yes, we never check raise. We just check called, check called. Is our opponent capable? That's a question you're going to have to answer yourself. But if you're playing against someone who exclaims, look at that sweet baby there, every time the flop comes jack 9 deuce, well, maybe they just might be capable. All right, finally, let's talk about two off the felt ways in which fear might manifest itself in poker decision making. And this would be fear of uncertainty. And we see this through both obsession over bankroll and when players study using solvers. So let's tackle these one by one and we'll start with bankroll. I see so many players who aren't playing full time, who are barely winning or who are break even or losing players just obsessed about bankroll. Like,
hey, you know, I need to build my bankroll.
No, you don't. You don't. They're just obsessed. What does my bankroll need to be to play 2-5? Or what does my bankroll need to be to play 5-10? None of this shit matters, right? If you have a full-time job, if you're not playing poker for a living, there are many, many more important questions to be asked, like how do I improve my win rate? What steps do I take to get better? How do I reach my goals in poker? What kind of actions can I be taking to help myself reach these goals in poker over the next year? And usually those steps are going to manifest itself through improving our game rather than worrying about some nebulous bankroll concern that just doesn't mean anything if you're not playing poker full time. Now, there are times to worry about bankroll, but it's usually when you're going to be a full-time player asking questions like how much bankroll do I need to shot take the 2-5 or shot take the 5-10 without putting myself at serious risk of ruin. These are good questions to ask and full-time players should be considering this type of stuff, but in general, part-time players who aren't big winners, don't worry about bankroll, worry about getting better first and the bankroll will come. Finally, the fear of uncertainty, I think, guides a lot of players' study habits, specifically when using solvers. And a lot of players are so worried about scratching that curiosity itch. They just want to open up the solver, plug in the hand that they just played, and get the answer.
Hey, was I supposed to bet ace queen with the queen of clubs in this spot? Hey, was I supposed to fold pocket jacks with the jack of diamonds in this spot?
Wondering if you played a certain spot correctly, scratching that curiosity itch, letting that fear of uncertainty drive your decision making is not going to help you become a better poker player in the long run. This is letting fear guide your decisions. How I like to use solvers is asking questions like, is the population under or over bluffing this spot? Well, how do I know? Let's sim the spot. Let's see what hands our opponent should be bluffing with. Oh, you know what? Maybe they're not bluffing with 9-7 suited here. Maybe they're not bluffing with 4-5 suited. Maybe they're not turning pocket threes into a bluff. And just saying, hey, the population is under bluffing in this spot, so we should be over folding. So again, I'm not saying don't use solvers. I'm not saying don't worry about bankroll. I'm just saying don't let your actions be guided by a fear of uncertainty. All right, guys, hopefully this video showed you how you can stop letting fear guide your decision making and also how you can exploit the players who are letting fear guide their decisions. Thank you, guys, and have a gentle